All right, everybody, Dave Call here. Let's go ahead and get this gears started. So, what I want you to know at first is that I have a seamless concrete texture located in source images. Let's go start making a gear with the pipe primitive. So, hold down spacebar, go to create polyprimitives pipe. Scale that up or just zoom in. And I will scale this down. I'll hit R, scale that. I'll zoom in on this, right mouse button, pick face, and I will select each face. And I'll hold down Alt and Shift to select every other face on this. See how that's going like this right here. Keep on going till we get every face selected. Now we hold down Shift and right mouse button and go to extrude face. Now the key to this is that we pull only the blue arrow. Pull that out for the gears. Then I'll hold down Alt and rotate, and I'm going to pull the red box to scale in and scale in on the Y box right there. So here's our gear looking robust. Now I want to bevel part of this, but not all of it. So what I'm going to do is select all the faces, and then I'm going to zoom in and hold down Shift and not select these faces. And what this will do is when it comes time to bevel, it won't look all that odd on the inside. So let's go ahead and do this. And I'll go to Edit Mesh Bevel Options. Let's see what we get around here. Now this is what I want here. The outside's beveling. To get more control, hold down the Control key and get a very tight bevel right here. That looks good. Now to see how this looks as a subdivision surface, we'll hit 3. And I'd say this looks about right. If I hit F8, I am now looking at the object. There is a little bit of damage here, but that's just because there's some triangles and we won't get that close to the gears. This is about as close as we'll get. So there's our gear. Now I want to put down a floor, so I'm going to go to Create Polyprimitives Plane. And I'll scale this up by hitting R, and I'll just keep scaling all the way out because we want a large floor. That looks good. I'm going to call this thing floor right there. And this piece, I'm going to call it gear 1. That'll be gear 1. And we also, once we're done with the gear, we want to delete the history. So I can go to Edit, Delete by Type History, also Alt-Shift-D. That'll speed up the process. If you look over here, you notice the gear is sunk into the floor, so I'm going to pull it up a bit. That looks good. And let's do some rendering techniques to take a look at this. Hold down spacebar. Now click up on top with the mouse. While holding spacebar, go to Hypershade Render Persp. That'll look good. And one key is to make sure that we are not using Maya software, but that we're using Mental Ray. Now, if for some reason Mental Ray is not in here, we have to go to Windows, Settings, Preferences, Plugin Manager. That is key. And then you scroll far down and look for Maya to MR and make sure auto load and loaded is on there, which they are, so that's good. Now, I want to make a Maya surface. Remember, leave Lambert 1 by itself. A Maya surface, I'll make a blend, which will allow a little bit of reflection. I'm going to double click it and I'm going to call it floor, or floor 1, since we already have a thing called floor. Now over here, under common material attributes, we have color. I am going to click on the checker. And I want a file And that file name is right in here under image name. And remember, I said I had the concrete seamless texture right there. So I'm going to go ahead and use that, open that. And notice how we have the texture on the floor here. Now there's a lot of ways to put a texture onto an object. One way is by clicking the floor and then right mouse button on the floor texture and go to assign material to selection. You don't see anything yet, but when you hit 6, you'll see that the texture is on there. Now, this is fine. However, I want to increase the amount of concrete I put on here. So I'm going to right mouse button on the floor one and go to graph network. This network will show up in here. And this is a little tight, but let me zoom in. What I'm looking for right here is place 2D texture. Now, place 2D texture has a repeat U and V direction. I'm going to type in 5 for the U, 5 for the V. And what that will do, you see it's much more dense now when I zoom in. That looks good. Remember, it is seamless, so that's effective right there. Now, let's go take a look at a render of this. Remember, mental ray, I'll click on this render button. Let's take a look at it. That looks fine, nothing much to it, no shadows, that's fine. Now, let's go and find a mental ray material. And down here under materials, next to mental ray, we have to find the MEL material X. So I'm going to zoom in on this and pull this out a little bit more, or right now close this so I have some room. We want MEL material X. In fact, I'll make 3, one for chrome, one for copper, and one for a glass. So the first one, MEL material X1, we go to presets and go to chrome replace. This is now a chrome shader or a material. Let's go to this one. Go to presets, copper, replace. Let's get that on there. Okay, and now over here, this presets, we'll do a glass solid perhaps. We'll try that out. And then we want to assign these to the gears. Now, I'm going to select gear 1 and right mouse button, assign material to selection. And this gear now has a chrome on it. However, I want more than one gear. So I'm going to Control D to duplicate. That looks good right there. And that one will have the copper. And I'll assign material to selection. And I will do Control D again and pull this over to here. And this one will have the glass shader. Okay, that looks pretty good. Hard to see the glass in there. If you hit 4, that's the wireframe. 5 is the shaded, and 6 is the textured. 7 is the lit. Notice how there's no lights on here. Easy to fix. Hold down spacebar, go to create lights, and I'm going to put on a spotlight. That renders pretty quickly. So for the spotlight, I will hit T as in transform, and notice how I can direct the spotlight right here. Tap the spacebar to get the maximum view, and I think I'll pull it around over here. And then to make sure I have the glass selected, I can also increase the cone angle like that. Now, I don't like this sharp edge, so I'm going to pull up the penumbra angle to 10. Now, normally, all these lights will have a drop-off. Right now, I'm not going to have that. There will be no decay. This will just be a simpler render. And I do want to scale the floor out, so I hit R, and I'll just scale it some more. So we just see this part right in here. Okay, scale it out some more. Now the glass is in there. And now we want to do Control A, Or go to the spotlight and you have the information for the spotlight. Now under shadows, this is important because we'll be using ray trace shadows, but we want them to be softer. So I'm going to turn the light radius to 1. This will increase render time a little bit, but not too bad. Shadow rays to 10. That will make it look okay. And let's give this a render. Easiest way to do that, spacebar, click on top of spacebar, Hypershade Render Perspective, or Persp. Now let's go ahead and render this again. Notice that I'm on Mental Ray, and this is the render full screen. Right now we're doing 960 by 540, which is fine, because we don't want to take too long rendering this thing, because we do want to render at 24 frames a second, and we do want 30 seconds as well. So you see this is taking a while, but it is looking pretty good. One thing I want to do is reduce the reflection. So that looks pretty good, but I don't want all the reflection on the concrete. So let's go to the floor one, double click it, and down into here, I'm going to pull reflectivity to 0.05. And also specular color. You see you have a specular here. I'll pull specular down so there's very little reflection or specular. Also, here's a trick you might enjoy. We want to put a slight bump on there. So notice that I have the concrete seamless, and let me click back on the shader, and if I drag the concrete seamless texture onto the bump mapping, we will actually get a bump. You can see it looks really intense here, but I am going to bring the bump depth to 0.15, and that will definitely make it less bumpy. Now, over here, this is very handy. We're going to keep this image and render this out again. It took 30 seconds at 960 by 540. I'll render it again. All right, and we're done. I happen to change this from solid glass to frosted glass. It looks a little bit nicer. So this is good. A little bit of texture here. And we have some shadows. You can soften them if you wanted to more. Now, let's go get some animation going. This is a fun part. So what I'd also like you to do is go to File, Increment, and Save. Very important that you save your work. And this is fine. I'll call it Gears. And hit Enter. Continue that. So we do want to increment and save very often because Maya can crash. Now, time to rotate the gears. So I'm going to go back into here and I'll hit 6 or 5. This will make it simpler to work with. And then I'm going to go Windows, Animation Editors, Expression Editor. Very handy. Windows Animation Editors, Expression Editor. And the first one I'm going to do is click on Gear 1, and I'm going to just start typing in the expression here. Now, this is a good trick. Control middle wheel will increase the size of the text. Gear 1, for instance, I'm using Control and middle wheel. .ry, this is shorthand for the rotate Y attribute of Gear 1, equals frame times 2, and I'll put a semicolon. Every MEL command, Maya embedded language, ends with a semicolon. Now if I hit create and I hit play, let's take a look. You see the gear is going. Notice though, we have to make sure we hit the right mouse button in the time slider and go to playback speed, play every frame, max real time. Very important. So let's see this. That's going. Now, notice if the expression appears to disappear, just go up to Select Filter by Expression Name and click on Expression 1. Now, let me get some more room down here. And I'm just going to copy Gear 1, Control C, hit Enter, Control V as in victory, And this will make this gear 2.rotate Y will now be equal to gear 1.ry, but it will be the inverse. That's why I'm putting a dash in here, and I'm going to hit edit. Now let's play this again. See how that works perfectly. Now you can probably guess what we're going to do here. Copy this, paste it, and this is now gear 3, and this will be the inverse of gear 2. We'll try that. Hit edit, and you see that's working well right here. If you want to see that with more clarity, just hit 4. And remember, 5 is solid, it's shaded, 6 is textured, and 7 is lit. Also keep in mind that these objects have been converted to sub-D surfaces by hitting 3. Now if I hit 1 on these, you see they're they're not smoothed out as sub-Ds, but if I select these again and hit, shift, select and hit 3, they'll have a little bit of roundness we need so that the mental images shader can do its work. Here it is, gear 1, rotate Y equals frame times 2. If you want a faster gear, you can put in 3, just hit edit, rewind it, and play. So you see that's doing well. Okay, one more bonus here. I'm going to duplicate yet another gear, Control D for Dave, and I'm going to pull this over here. This is gear 4, you can see right here. I'm going to copy this, Control C, Control V, and gear 4.rotate Y. Let's just take out the dash and let's see how this works here. Now I'm going to show you a little trick. We want to rotate this gear so it's 90 degrees. The easiest way to do it is to select the gear and do Control G to group. Now look at where the pivot is. This will obviously not work, so hit Z to undo it. Then I go to Modify Center Pivot. This is key, Modify Center Pivot. And then all I have to do, if you look in the outliner, very important, we have group 1, which is the group over gear 4. So this will be gear 4. Oops, let's do camel code. And what that means is lowercase, gear 4, and capital GROUP for the next word, gear 4 group. Now, gear 4 group, I can make sure I'm hitting it by hitting the up arrow, and then I can just rotate this, say 90 on the X. And I do Control A to get to the attribute editor. So I'll type in 90 on the X, and then I'll zoom in. Notice I'm selecting gear 4 group, not gear 4. Make sure that stays up here, and I'm going to blend this in like this right here. Let's go take a look at it now. Let's get up close. The expression editor, I will minimize that, and let's hit play. Now you see how this works. This gives a simulation that these gears are all in sync and one's rotating, but I have just rotated the group, and that is key, very key. So there you go. Go back to the Windows Animation Editor's Expression Editor. Here are all the expressions. There's 4 of them for 4 gears. Now, by the way, if you do want to do some testing, this is how you comment out a single line in MEL with the 2 forward slashes. Now, if I go to edit and play, notice how this is not going because Maya is not evaluating this line. So I'll hit stop, take out these 2 slashes, I'll hit edit again, and there we go. So now those are the expressions, very simple. And we can then make a short animation starting at frame 1. And I'm going to view, select camera. That's key right there. And this is the perspective camera. I will hit S to put a keyframe on frame 1. And on frame 200, I might zoom in a little bit over here and hit S. Now take a look at this. And if I hit play, you see that the camera will be rotating as well. When you hit 7, you can see that this is the lit version. It's a viewport 2.0 renderer. That looks good. We'll give this a render to see how it looks by going to spacebar, hybrid shade render persp, and I'll render this again. Okay, render is done. Let's take a look at it. Here it is, and you see there's a lot of chrome and it's reflecting everywhere, and that looks good. So the next step is we go to File, Increment, and Save. Continue that. And now it is time to render it out with the render options, render settings. Now, because I am on this single machine, I'm just going to render targas. That's fine. And also, instead of name.extension single frame, very important, make it name.hashtag or number.extension. You know what that will do will allow you to render some frames. I'm going to have to render 30 frames, not too long, or I think I'll do 48, so that'll be 2 seconds worth. Now, I don't need the alpha channel. The renderable camera will retain perspective, persp. And over here, I'm going to make this custom just because I want this to render a little faster, 720 by 405. That's pretty small, but it is a 16:9 aspect ratio. Now let's go to quality. If you want to turn up the quality, you can. I'm going to leave it like this. There's also final gather, which is simulating bounce light. You do not use ambient light anymore, but this is fine right here, right now. What I do want to put on is motion blur. No deformation is what I want because these objects are not flexing, they're just rotating. And I'll turn up the motion blur by 3, and I'll put 3 motion steps. That will add some blur, and that'll look pretty good. Then I'll hit close. And then if you just want to render on this machine, we're going to go to render, batch render. And if I go to the options, you'll see that just keep it all this stuff right here, batch render and close. Let's go ahead and allow that to render and save the student version. And then we will see this rendering. So that is the plan. All right, thank you. Okay, now we need to bring the frames that we rendered into After Effects CC, and this is how we're going to do it. Right mouse button in the project area. I'm going to go to import file, not multiple files, but file. I am then going to find my images rendered in the images folder. I'll click on the first file, and notice that this will import as a targa sequence right here. I'm going to import that. Ignore the alpha channel. Now here's one issue. We were rendering at 24 frames a second, but After Effects assumes it's 30 frames a second. Here's a trick for you. Select the gears, right mouse button, interpret footage main. Very important. Assume this frame rate of 24. That is what you want. Now this will be playing 2 seconds worth, and I can pull that down into here. The other thing I want to check is composition settings. Frame rate of 24, duration of 2 seconds is good. If I play this, you see it's kind of dark. And that is because we have to go to effects presets, go to gamma, and drag that gamma onto here, and the black stretch will just pull it up to 2.2. That looks about right. So if we play that, that's looking good, 2 seconds worth. So the only other step we have right now is to go to composition, add to Adobe Media Encoder queue. That's a newer version of the render queue, which has more flexibility to it. And what we're going to do is make it an H.264, match the high bit rate. And the output area, I will go ahead and put it in the D drive, my machine in the D. That's fine, just call it gears 1 with a high bit rate MP4, and we just hit the green button to play. That's all we're going to do. That'll take a little second, and then it will render these out. And here it goes, going very quickly. And it looks like it rendered both out there. Okay, so that is done. Now we can go look at the gears, and I will play those.